How you doing, everybody? This is John Arezzi. Welcome to another edition of Pro Wrestling Spotlight Live right here on Facebook. It is September the 12th, 2020, and we have a great show lined up for you today. We're going to bring on a New York Times best-selling author who has a brand new book out, and that's Keith Elliot Greenberg. I'm a really big fan of his work, as he had wrote several books that I had read going back to this one right here, the Freddie Blassie biography that he did with Fred. He also did the Superstar Billy Graham book and a Ric Flair book. And he's got a brand new book that talks about what's going on with the indie revolution. Too Sweet. And Keith Elliot Greenberg will be joining us later on in the program. And we're also going to bring on, as we do each and every week, from slamwrestling.net, Alex Robertson. And then later joining us with Keith will be Greg Oliver, who runs Slam Wrestling. So it should be a great show. And we got some exciting things to also announce today as well. So I'm happy that you're all joining us. And comments are coming in. Dan Brown, Aaron, Tuaya, Tap Brown, Kyle Wagner. So thank you all for joining us and all the others that are joining right now here on Facebook Live. And one thing we're going to start doing in about a week or so, we're going to start streaming this show live on YouTube as well. So we're growing the audience each and every week, and we look forward to bringing you lots of great content in the weeks to come. This is my final weekend in New York until Thanksgiving. I head back to Tennessee tomorrow. I make a stop in Roanoke, Virginia, to meet with a gentleman who has vast archives of pro wrestling stuff, a lot of stuff from Mid-South days, Mid-South Championship Wrestling days. So we are going to start working with him on bringing to you at our Facebook auction site, John Arezzi's Vintage Wrestling Auctions. We're going to start bringing out autographed posters and 8x10s and vintage magazines from the early 60s. So those will be available next weekend as well, along with all the other stuff that we have up on our auction site right now, which includes vintage magazines and videotapes from the Week in the Champions. So if you haven't had a chance, go to Facebook and go to John Arezzi's Vintage Wrestling Auctions. There's some really cool stuff there. So without further ado, I want to bring on Alex Robertson from Montreal. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, John?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been pretty hectic here. I had a Wi-Fi outage about 5 minutes before the program. So I had to run upstairs to where my sister is, and I was like, please reboot the router. The thing has been giving some problems over the last week or so, and of course it goes out 5 minutes before the show. So, yeah, you know, it's just part of what we do. It's radio, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have a background here I'm going to take off, so just bear with me here. I didn't get a chance to prepare because I was frantic a few minutes ago. So let me see if I could find that, and then we'll talk about the news. Here we go. Got it. Good. All right, so here we are. How's everything up there? Is it getting a little bit cooler now that the summer is winding down to an end?
Yeah, we actually had quite a cold week up here, quite a difference from the 22 to 30 degrees that we were having. So now that we're approaching October, it's getting colder, but you know, I'm hoping that with the colder weather and, you know, hopefully things will start to change up here. And I'm hoping this, you know, COVID-19 will start to die down, but you never know. We never know for the second wave. So we'll see.
Are your borders still closed to Americans?
Yes, they extended it, I think, twice now. I think it's till the end of this month, the borders will remain closed. And I anticipate that we will keep our borders closed till Christmas, New Year's, up to then.
Yeah, because my nephew, producer Dominic, who's not here today, he's working at the town beach. It's getting a little cooler there, but he and a bunch of his friends that he worked with were planning a trip to Montreal the first week of January. I'm like, it's got to be cold up there at that time, and if the borders got to be open. So
yeah, exactly.
He's going to get his passport next week, and about 10 of them are planning on heading up your way first week of January. So that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, it's a good thing that the Cauliflower Alley Club the reunion isn't happening this year, because I wouldn't be able to go at this point. Right. So.
Yeah. That would be horrible. I hope everything takes place next April, because I'm really looking forward to that one. That should be a lot of fun. So what's going on in the wrestling business this week? Anything exciting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely wouldn't call this exciting, but about 65 WWE employees were released this week.
How many?
Most
65?
of which, about 65. Yeah.
I know Jerry Briscoe was one.
Jerry Briscoe was one. He's the biggest name so far, him and Mike Rotunda, to come out of this. But yeah, so far 65, and most of the releases were related to their live event staff. So not necessarily a good sign for the company, but I mean, these things happen. I know that a lot of them, some of the bigger ones came out and said, I was kind of thrown off. I didn't know this was going to happen, but it's the name of the business. It's the name of the game. So unfortunately, these things have to happen. But if they are all related to the live event staff, when they start getting back on the road, hopefully they will be brought back. I mean, we'll see, right?
Yeah, I mean, their expenses have really dropped because they're not doing all these live events, and their profit margin has went up. So they're making a profit. They're making more money than they have because of all the expenses that are not there anymore. But no one wants to see anybody get furloughed or laid off. So that's sad. That's sad, because Jerry was part of them for decades, big part of the company. And he said on the social media machines that he had gotten the call from Vince McMahon, and that was it. And I reached out to Jerry this week because I'd love to have him on the show here and just kind of talk to him about his career. And he's still an asset. He's still a keen eye of talent. So we wish him the best, and all the others that were laid off this week.
Yeah, I know that Slam also tried to reach out to him. And at this point, I think he's just trying to digest the news. I think it's going to take a little bit of time. But I mean, I'm hoping that he will bounce back, especially somebody like him, for sure. With that much experience, I would really like to think so. Great
guy. I met him a couple of times last year, Cauliflower Alley, and then at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame induction ceremonies in Iowa. And Jerry and I were conversing several times late last year and before the pandemic hit. And I just really respect that guy enormously. And it's sad to see that the cutbacks are there. So 65 employees out for now in the WWE.
Yeah, I mean, not great. But on the flip side, the WWE is doing something to kind of extend their brand a little bit. They announced this week that Alexa Bliss will have her own sort of podcast. It's going to be called Uncool with Alexa Bliss. And once they made the announcement this week, it's actually kind of cool because, pardon the pun, it's actually kind of cool because it's all about these people coming onto the podcast and talking about their most vulnerable or embarrassing experiences. And they range, from all types of celebrities. So this week when they announced it, she actually went on her social media and said, send me your most embarrassing pictures from when you were younger. And it's cool, the kind of responses that she got. So, I mean, she had her own moment of bliss on when she was on Raw at one point, and she did fairly well with that. So I'm hoping that, this podcast will be a success. This is going to be their second one that I know of. So yeah, hopefully that'll be great. I'll definitely be tuning into that. It's going to drop September 22nd, I believe, on all streaming platforms.
Yeah, she's one of my favorites. I mean, she's got great charisma. She's a great personality. She's a very exciting wrestler to watch. I mean, she's got that it factor, and a lot of people do, but I mean, she's a standout because she's so versatile in her skill sets. Yeah. from being an on-air personality, and this podcast seems like it's right up her alley.
Definitely. I mean, she's also made appearances on Total Divas. She was on for one of their seasons, so we kind of got to see her out of the Alexa Bliss persona. And yeah, she seems like a very bubbly person. I think she'll have a great time with this, and I'm really excited to see how that turns out for sure.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah, and sticking on the not so WWE theme, but still in the company theme, we were talking earlier this week on Tuesday about Matt Hardy and the unfortunate incident that occurred at All Out. So this week on Dynamite, he came out and he made a statement. He came out to the crowd to kind of respond to what had happened. And although this time he looked a little bit more with it, he looked like he knew where he was. He did say that he passed all of the concussion protocol tests, which is what we had heard previously from AEW management. And he said his plan is to return to the ring at some point. So, I mean, it's nice to see, and I'm really happy that he wants to come back and get back into action. I just hope that it's not too soon and he gives his body a little bit more time to adjust and you know, fully recover and not bounce back right into something, because you never know what can happen. Absolutely.
You got to be extra careful there, of course. I mean, that's a dangerous situation for anybody to hit their head as hard as he did on that show. It was difficult to watch, actually.
Yeah. So we're all hoping for the best, but he's one of the greatest. So I'm happy to see him come back at some point.
Absolutely. Same here.
And AEW has had two announcements this week. They had a little surprise on Dynamite, and Rusev, who is now Miro, will be on All Elite Wrestling's roster. He came out with, you know, a different kind of look.
Yeah.
Now has blonde hair. He's a little bit more slimmer, and he's hitched his wagon to Kip Sabian right now as his best man at his wedding to Penelope Ford. So we'll see how that turns out. But I was really excited to see him there. I loved watching him in the WWE. And I think he's a great addition to this roster.
I think so too. I watched it myself and I was happy to see him there. He lives not too far from me down in Franklin, Tennessee. I've seen him several times out and about with Lana, and saw him on a couple of airplanes. And he's always been one of my favorites. And I don't think that he got the push that he really deserved, because he's got a lot of charisma. He's super strong, and the fans gravitate to him. They love him. So I hope that his new arrival at AEW leads to a big push for him there. And Lana's still with the WWE, though. I mean, and that angle with Bobby Lashley, is she still married to him on the storyline? Or, I mean, what the heck is, or fiance, whatever she was? I mean,
that's definitely over now. They kind of just phased it out with not any really explanation to it. Now she's actually a tag team, if you will, with Natalya, which works more to her benefit, because Natalya, being, you know, the best there was, the best there will be, and the best there ever was, she's a great wrestler. So of course, if Lana's going to learn from anybody, it would be from her. I'm not too sure about the storyline as of yet, because they're kind of playing more heel characters, and I never really saw Natalya as a very heel like personality. But I mean, it's getting Lana to be more active. She had a match on Monday.
She did. Okay.
She did. It wasn't, you know, it was typical for what, you know, Lana can perform. We'll just say that. But I mean, we'll see how this turns out. It could, you know, turn into a championship run for those tag team titles at some point. Who knows? But it's nice that they're using her in another capacity and not just as a valet for somebody. So maybe they see some potential in her as a wrestler. I don't know. We'll see as things move on.
And I wonder how long it'll be before she gets the axe too, because her husband's over with the competitors now.
Yeah, although I don't see AEW hiring her by chance to go with her husband. I think I don't know that would work out so well, but I'm happy to see Rusev where he is, and I'm hoping that he's going to branch out and be himself. You know, himself as a character and not attached to anybody else, not a valet, or when he was with Aiden English or anything like that. So I'm hoping he kind of breaks away from that and he's his own talent on his own, because I think that could really work.
Yeah, he's a legitimate contender.
Yeah.
And we certainly wish him the best over at AEW, and we'll be watching.
Definitely.
So, yeah, it's been interesting news week, as it always is. And once again, we appreciate your time here, as now you are with us every week.
Every week.
Great. We have a really cool show lined up next week, so we won't we'll announce it at the end of the show today, but we'll bring you back next Saturday with the news, and we love having you with us. And stay warm up there in Canada as the weather turns cold. And I'm sure there'll be some great stuff to talk about next week.
Definitely. I look forward to it. Safe travels, John.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care. Alex Robertson from up in Montreal, Canada, and she's our regular news correspondent, courtesy of slamwrestling.net. And Greg Oliver will be joining us shortly as well. But before we do anything else, we have a special guest that we've talked about, and he has joined us in the waiting room, and I want to bring him on right now. And it's a New York Times best-selling author, Keith Elliot Greenberg. And Keith, it's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you officially on the air as well.
Exactly. You're a Queens, New York guy, aren't you?
Indeed I am, yes.
Did you grow up a Mets fan or a baseball fan?
This is how much of a Mets fan I grew up as, if you could see it.
No kidding. You got Mr. Met on your arm.
That's right.
That's I don't have any tattoos myself personally, but if I was ever going to get one, and I've told my nephew and my family, if I was ever going to get a tattoo, it was going to be a Mr. Met, and you have it. How far back does your fandom go with the Mets?
Well, my fandom goes, certainly, I was 10 years old in 1969 when they won the World Series. I was a fan previous to that. The first game I ever attended was a Yankee game when I was 3, because I had a grandfather from the Bronx. I was actually born in the Bronx. But as soon as we moved to Queens, my Mets fandom was in place.
Yeah, my first game was July the 3rd, 1966. My uncle took me, and I remember it was 100 degrees, and he was a diehard Yankee fan. So I always wondered that if he took me to Yankee Stadium first, would I have avoided the decades, now 50 years of misery, with the exception of a couple of good years and some playoff opportunities? But the Mets have always found a way to stomp on my heart in a different way every year.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about your uncle bringing you to a game. I deliberately avoided taking my kids to too many Yankee games because I just assumed that they would turn into Yankee fans. And, by the time they were 7 or 8 years old, their Mets fandom was in place.
Yeah, my nephew, who's 23 now, and his father's a diehard Yankee fan. And when he was in the crib, I'd buy Mr. Met stuffed dolls, and I'd throw them in the crib. And, one of the first words he said was Met. So I gave him the curse, and we go to spring training every year. We go travel around the country with the Mets. I mean, we've done that several times, but in hindsight, I'm like, I wonder if he should have been a Yankee fan, but we watch the games and we enjoy it. But anyway, I'm happy to see that you're a diehard Mets fan. I love your tattoo. I love the ink of Mr. Met. He's one of my heroes, Mr. Met. But we brought you up. We brought you here to talk about a brand new book that you have, and we got it here myself. And you got to be proud to have another book out in the marketplace. But I first learned about you back with the Freddie Blassie book, and that for me was Fred Blassie ran his fan club. I mean, in 1972, and Freddie was the guy that kind of brought me in the business in the way of running the fan club. And here's a shot of us the first day I met him in 1973 at the Garden. And here's a copy of your book that I loved and I still cherish. But you also had so many books out there, the Billy Graham book, the Ric Flair book. I mean, so you have written a ton of books, and you are a New York Times bestseller. Which book was the one that got you on the New York Times bestseller list?
Well, the Flair book initially, the Lennon book, the John Lennon book I wrote did very well also. And there's books that I've written that haven't sold well that I'm still very fond of, as you can relate to.
Yeah, and you have that book that really was never published that a lot of people talk about. Was that one with the Iron Sheik, I believe?
Yes, it was. The Iron Sheik and I did a book together. We did two versions of it. The first time was completed around 2009. And the Iron Sheik and I grew quite close. And I grew to see him as somebody other than the character people became familiar with on the Howard Stern show. He was a very serious amateur wrestler. He was not Olympian as the fiction went in professional wrestling, but he was in the Pan American Games. And his mentor, his wrestling mentor, had gotten into some trouble politically, which is very interesting talking about that today, because the current Iranian government just put an amateur wrestling hero to death this week.
I heard about that. My nephew was telling me about that this morning, and I was like, "Well, who was it? What was it?" And he
was a sports hero who spoke out against the Iranian regime, and he was put to death. There were international appeals, and it didn't stop his execution. And the Iron Sheik's hero, who was just Takhti was his name. He was revered in Iran, and this was during the time of the Shah. And I believe he spoke out about the Shah not being considerate enough of Iran's poorer citizens. And he was found dead in a hotel room. And this is Khosrow Vaziri prior to being the Iron Sheik. He had a good life over there because he was a star athlete who was certainly being groomed for the Olympics. He had a job as a sound technician or a production assistant with Iranian national television. And he thought to himself, if they could do this to Takhti, what would they do to me? And he had met the coach from the University of Minnesota during an international tournament. And the coach had given him the option of training in Minnesota. And he got on a plane. He first stayed with a relative in Flushing, Queens. And then he continued to Minnesota. And Minnesota was the home of Vern Gagne and the AWA. And eventually he was trained in that very famous class that included Ric Flair. And I believe Jim Brunzell was in that class as well. And there were some other really good wrestlers whose name, Ken Patera, who was also a former Olympian. I mean, that was an amazing class.
It was.
Yeah, really was. They were trained by Vern Gagne, and they were trained by Billy Robinson. And Billy Robinson was a notorious shooter and a hooker. The Iron Sheik claimed that Billy Robinson had cheap shot at him at one point, and he held a grudge about it. But, that was the backstory of Khosrow Vaziri, the man who became the Iron Sheik. And it was Mary Gagne who suggested the name the Iron Sheik, Vern Gagne's wife. They were at the 1976 Olympics. This is another thing many people don't know. The Iron Sheik was a assistant coach for the United States Olympic team, both in 1972 and 1976. That's how good he was. And they were in Montreal, and Mary Gagne suggested the name the Iron Sheik. And he said, there aren't any sheiks in Iran. I mean, there's sheiks in Lebanon, there's sheiks in Saudi Arabia. And she's like, the fans won't know. And he goes, well, there's already a sheik. There's a sheik in Detroit. And she said, he doesn't pay your bills. And that's how he became the Iron Sheik. So it was a beautiful story.
Yeah.
But there were also other elements of the Iron Sheik story, the more notorious elements.
Yeah, I know.
Smuggling an 8-ball of Coke across the Canadian border. Him and Rowdy Roddy Piper being pulled over in the Carolinas, and Piper having this mortarboard where he's, just chopping up pills and cocaine and everything you can imagine. The Iron Sheik clotheslining a groupie who was looking for Marty Jannetty. And then telling Marty Jannetty, it's okay, she just didn't know how to work. And so I am assuming that when the book came out, when the book was being circulated, it went to someone at WWE. Well, the first time he still had a drug problem. So Simon & Schuster said it's not really a very redeeming story. Then I wrote a story for Playboy magazine about the Iron Sheik, and by then he had kicked drugs legitimately. And so WWE and ECW Press now, no longer Simon & Schuster, decided to publish the Iron Sheik story because now it was a redeeming story. But someone high up at WWE determined that all those sordid tales probably were not good for the brand. And the book was killed for a second time. Now, WWE owns the book. And I will say I was paid to write that book twice. So I can't really complain. But it's a shame because, as I call it, I believe I refer to it as the greatest unpublished treasure in the annals of wrestling journalism.
Well, I'm sure it is. And it's a something that, do you think it'll ever come out? I mean,
I'm asked this a lot. I say when Stephanie and Triple H's daughter is in charge, perhaps she'll look back on those stories, and instead of them being shocking, by that point they'll appear quaint, and she'll go, sure, let's put it out.
Yeah, I mean, once they take over, when the old man decides to call it a day, I think the organization will also spend more time on history pre-1985, because they tend to forget, some of the amazing legacy that company had. So that always gets to me, because I know their archives is rich with great stuff.
Sure, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things I want to ask you before we get to the current book is the Blassie book. Because obviously he's near and dear to me, and he was one of the greatest ever. Tell me a little bit about how that book came to be and how it was working with classy Freddie Blassie.
The book came to me in the best way possible. Freddie Blassie requested that I co-write his book. And Freddie Blassie was maybe 84 at that point. He died at 85.
Yeah.
There was definitely an awareness that Freddie Blassie wasn't long for this world. His days were consumed with doctor appointments, and his wife fussed over him. You knew his wife. Fussed over him, watched everything he ate. And, but he had a story, and he was saving that story. And he had notebooks of with beautiful penmanship of his writing.
Oh, his penmanship was amazing, wasn't it?
Because he used to write you letters.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And I mean, I used to get a letter. I was like, look at this. I mean,
he credits the nuns who he despised the nuns because they used to beat the life out of him, but he credits them with he credited them with his penmanship. And he was forgetful about current things, day-to-day things, whether to take his medication or not. But he was not forgetful about the past. Mm. And he wanted all of this to come out. So it was a great pleasure. And I'll tell you a story. At one point, a childhood friend of mine, Jeff Steinmark, who might be watching this right now, I brought him over to the Iron Sheik's house, Freddie Blassie's home, because he and I were such big Blassie fans. And Jeff brought a camera, and Freddie was in his bathrobe, and we had a very nice chat. And Jeff never took the camera out because he said, you know what? I want to remember Freddie Blassie the way I saw him on television, and I'm not going to degrade him by taking a picture of him when his defenses are down. And that was the type of relationship I had with Freddie. And I'm also going to say something. You don't hear many nice things about the McMahon family from many people, because it's always like I was listening to your prior guest. Well, they just laid off Jerry Briscoe, or, the wrestlers can't go on Cameo anymore without approval from the company. But when Freddie Blassie was dying, I went to visit him in the hospital. And Linda McMahon and Shane McMahon were also there. This was the day before he died. And we were all leaving, and Shane went back and just stood at the bed and communed with Freddie Blassie, who was pretty out of it at that point. And at Freddie's funeral, Vince spoke. And then there was a restaurant owner in the Bronx, in Little Italy in the Bronx, who considered himself practically a son to Freddie. He spoke at the funeral too, and he invited us to the restaurant afterwards. And I sat at a table with Shane McMahon, his wife, Marissa McMahon, Linda, and Vince. That was the table. And I have to say, Vince didn't take a phone call. Vince didn't look at his phone. He was there to honor Freddie. So that was 100% sincere.
Well, I know that Blassie had such a warm place with the McMahons. I mean, they literally, Shane and Stephanie, they looked at him as a grandfather, and Vince loved him. Vince Sr., Vince Jr. I mean, they kept him on the payroll. They took care of him. And that's one of the endearing factors of the McMahon family to me, although, I've butted heads for decades with them and my coverage of the business. But what they did for Fred and how they treated Fred, and this story that you're telling me, just kind of reemphasizes that and reinforces everything that I've heard about how much they loved classy Freddie Blassie. So it's really, really good to hear that, and really, really good to hear that how close you were. And I know that Fred wanted that book out before he passed, and I believe those wishes came true.
They did. He died 3 weeks after the book came out, but he was still able to do an angle on Raw. He was brought out in a wheelchair.
Bubba Ray?
With Bubba Ray. Yeah. Was it 3 count? There was some heel faction that interrupted. And he said, the Dudleys saved him. And he said, get the tables. And he got a bit confused, he told me, because Devon used to stick his tongue out. And Freddie, I think, stuck his tongue out before he said, get the tables. But he eventually gathered himself and shouted, get the tables.
Great story. Well, I mean, that's a great story, great book. You've had so many books out there. I mean, there's been, how many altogether have you written that have been published?
I mean, look, I'm 61 years old, and I've been a professional writer since I'm 19. So I'd say in excess of 30 or 35. Now, some of them are children's books, but I let's say in excess of 30 to be.
And the Lennon book, I didn't even, I might have even read it. I mean, I'm a big Beatles nut, big crazy Beatles fan. And Lennon, I mean, it was just kind of when Tom Seaver passed away, a little over a week ago, it hit me as hard as when Lennon died. I mean, it was that much.
Piece of your life, yeah.
Oh my goodness, those are your heroes growing up. Speaking of heroes, there's somebody in the waiting room that I want to bring on to join us. He's kind of a hero of mine because he's the person
writing your book.
In my book, I told him my story, and I wanted to bring him on because he is someone that obviously is in author of 15 books. And I wanted to bring him on to add to this conversation, especially when we talk about this brand new book that's out right now. Let's bring on Greg Oliver, the guru of slamwrestling.net up in Canada, an author of many, many books. And he joins us now from up there, the Great White North. Greg Oliver, here you go. You got your son in the background there.
Yeah, my tech guru.
Is he doing all right? He set you up okay?
I think so. I'm in a new chair, so I don't know if you can tell. Am I any different? So But yeah, that's quite the introduction. I'm no one's hero. Let's put it that way. So
You're modest too.
I try. But yeah, no, it's good to see you, Keith. Keith and a couple other authors over the years, when they come by my house in Toronto, I make them sign all the books. So Keith signed all the books, and then Pat and Bert, Pat Laprade and Bertrand Hébert had to sign all the books. It's just, it's a good tradition at this point.
Yeah, it's nice. And I remember you and I, after the Sweet Daddy Siki screening, we sat on your porch drinking bourbon until about 4:00 in the morning, and I got to the airport on time, and then I fell asleep in the airport and missed my flight anyway.
Those are good times. See?
Yeah.
Definitely. And gentlemen, I mean, this is it. This is the new book. And, we all have now worked with Michael Holmes. And from what I understand, the idea for this book happened. Was it at All In?
It was just after WrestleMania 34.
Okay, tell us the story about how it happened.
Yeah. Michael Holmes is the executive editor at ECW Press, and as I point out in the book, ECW Press stands for Essays on Canadian Writing, not Extreme Championship Wrestling.
Right.
It is not. It's not Paul Heyman's press.
I always thought years ago. I thought it was. It was like ECW owns this publishing company.
Yeah, I remember thinking the same thing. It only made sense. So the inspiration for this book, and I'll say the proper name,
yes.
Too Sweet, Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution, I was at WrestleMania 34, and I was walking around New Orleans, and I saw an enormous amount of Bullet Club shirts. And I said, that's interesting. This is primarily a WWE weekend. Of course, there were dozens of indie promotions exploiting that and putting on their own shows. But I said a lot of fans are wearing Bullet Club shirts, and that's unusual because I remembered in the WCW days when I was writing for WWE's magazines, you'd go to WrestleMania and you didn't see people sporting NWO shirts during those weekends. And Michael Holmes was in New Orleans, and he noticed the same thing. And when we both got back to our respective homes, we had a chat. And I said, there's a phenomenon going on. And he agreed. And I said, it's time to do a book about the indie wrestling revolution. And it was my idea to do this type of cover, which would, it's not a direct ripoff of the Bullet Club logo, but it's similar enough to invoke those thoughts.
Pretty good marketing. I just saw a question about when is the book available? It's available now. It's out, isn't it?
Available now. And I'd say you could go to ECW Press's website, go to Amazon, or what is it, Indigo in Canada?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, Indigo. That's where you'd find it.
Yeah, I like to say, and I've said this often, you can go to any bookstore and request a book, and they'll order it for you. And chances are,
I prefer that because there's a bookstore right over here in Park Slope, Brooklyn, where I own a home. And I would love for those guys. It's an independently run bookstore. I would love for those guys to get the business.
Yeah, and chances are they'll order a couple other books, or maybe you meet them and you get to do a signing. You never know, right? So
yeah.
But I found the book fascinating. I'm not finished with it yet, but there was a lot of research, and you spent a lot of time with a lot of these guys. I mean, tell us a little bit about that experience. I mean, was everybody embracing this? And, the fact that you were writing a book on the revolution, because indie wrestling and the fact that the Garden sold out outside of a WWF, WWE promotion, and what they did in Chicago, which led kind of to AEW. I mean, it literally was a revolution. So tell us about the cooperation you received, how easy it was to get everybody engaged in the book, and just the thought process of putting it all together.
Well, I didn't know how it would come all together. When I started working on the book, I believe All In had occurred, but that's right, All In had occurred, but AEW was not a reality yet.
Not yet.
In fact, all of the Bucks and Kenny Omega and Cody were still with Ring of Honor. And in fact, Hangman Page and SCU. And in fact, Ring of Honor invited me to a couple of their events, and I interviewed some of those guys backstage at Ring of Honor events. So we didn't know that AEW was going to be created. So I happened to kind of slide in there at a time when a new chapter was about to be written. And the book begins and ends with Joey Janela. Joey Janela was completely available. In fact, I feel if I text him now and I say I need quotes for something, he'll get back to me right away. And so, in many ways, he represents that indie wrestling revolution. He was a kid, pretty much untrained. He'd do anything to get attention, no matter how dangerous or antisocial it was. And he was at All In, and he's backstage, and he's looking at Okada's back there, and Kota Ibushi's back there, and Kenny Omega's back there. And he's like, wait, I'm with these guys. I'm backstage with these guys. Marco Stunt later told me he felt the exact same thing. And he's watching the crowd come in, and he's like, man, this is big, because it was over 11,000 fans. And this whole thing, the reason All In even came to pass was Dave Meltzer predicted that no indie wrestling promotion would be in North America would be able to draw more than 10,000 fans. It was kind of
a bet, wasn't it?
It was a dare that Cody took up. And then we go back, like, how did we get here? We go back through history. We go back to the early 1960s, to the outlaw promotions, to Jim Crockett Sr. running a renegade promotion in New York City with Antonino Rocca as his headliner to challenge Vincent James McMahon and the late Toots Mondt. And we build from there. We go to the ECW era. We go to the post WCW purchase, we go 2001 when WWE purchased WCW. And now the indies redefine themselves. And then we get to 2012. Now, in this time, we actually have indie stars being created. And in 2012, it's a critical year. Bushiroad buys New Japan, which means the New Japan product is taking a giant leap from what it had been during the Antonio Inoki era. Progress and Revolution Pro open up in the UK. In Pro Wrestling Guerrilla in LA, Kevin Steen, Kevin Owens, El Generico, Sami Zayn, and Adam Cole all hold the PWG title, and NXT is created, all in 2012. And that is the pivotal year that leads to what we have now. And the book ends with Joey Janela and Marco Stunt and Orange Cassidy and Jungle Boy and referee Bryce Rensburg all appearing on a Game Changer wrestling show in Asbury Park and leaving from that show to attend the first AEW Dynamite taping. And the idea is, and now the next chapter begins. And I'm writing a sequel because a sequel is necessary.
Wow.
Yeah, you just took my question away, Keith. I was going to ask how soon you knew about the sequel.
I knew about the sequel before I finished the book.
Okay, that's good. That's a lot of confidence that ECW Press shows in you, and well, obviously you've earned it, but that's a big step, and it shows a lot of the popularity of the guys you're mentioning. Right? It's not the same old people you're writing about.
Right. Now, we didn't know there was going to be a coronavirus, but I was not fortunate. I know that's poor terminology, but I was able to tinker with the epilogue up until April. And so I was able to mention the coronavirus in the epilogue and tease the sequel. And I think the last line is, let's say, but that was before an international pandemic resulted in empty arena matches, hundreds of cancellations, and an abnormal version of WrestleMania that forced WWE to do some of its most creative work ever. That's the last line of the epilogue. So it's like, to be continued.
Wow. Well, that's really cool. I mean, I think it's a great book that's out there, and it the way that it covers some of those outlaw things. I mean, we keep thinking of independent wrestling as being a recent thing, and it really isn't. There's been outlaws all along the way. It's just some of them weren't as well financed or as ambitious, maybe, as you mentioned Crockett. There's the Eddie Einhorn, like all the different ones along the way that really tried to buck the trend. And here we are with AEW, which is doing the same thing. They're trying to buck the trend and create a new thing.
Now, they even did over 1 million viewers this past
yes, they
Wednesday,
did.
I think. Was that the first time for that?
No, they did over 1 million viewers twice shortly after their debut. Now, they were also running unopposed because there were the NHL playoffs. So,
right.
Were they, or was it the NBA playoffs? Why was NXT moved to Tuesday night? There was a reason why NXT.
That was the NHL playoffs, but then the playoffs kind of got postponed, and they could have moved it back. It just, again, all the pandemic stuff and all the Black Lives Matter protests and all these things that are making a really lively time to be alive, even if you're stuck at home.
Yeah, and this is what my sequel is going to be about. It's going to be about pro wrestling during the age of COVID-19. And, Black Lives Matter is part of that. And, the speaking out movement is part of that. And the furloughs in WWE are part of that. These are all part of, there's wrestling evolves and the world evolves. And I'm not ignoring wrestling's supposed to be escapism, but I'm not ignoring the big world that's out there.
Well, that's a good. I got a question for you two guys then. Why has WWE or AEW really not done anything with Black Lives Matter? Or are they just scared of pissing off sponsors?
I don't know. I mean, Keith Lee wore a Black Lives Matter slogan on his singlet not long after the death of George Floyd.
Right, yeah, and I know Big E's done a couple of things. But
it's not as prominent as the other sports. I mean, you have a major awareness in all the sports for Black Lives Matter and everything that's been going on, but wrestling has kind of taken a back seat to creating or at least acknowledging what's going on, and they've done it in a small.
They're not ignoring what's going on.
They're not ignoring it, no, but it's.
And look, this is an interesting topic to bring up: the Retribution faction. Now, is the Retribution faction a watered-down version of Antifa? I don't know anybody backstage there well enough to ask them. Obviously, they're playing it very cautiously.
Yeah.
But there's certain connotations, but it doesn't go so far as to offend anybody.
I think it's all Ole Anderson's doing. He's really the Black Scorpion.
He's finally getting his revenge from
Ole's Revenge. There's a title for a book. We have some questions coming in, so I'm going to take a few of them. I mean, we got lots coming in, so without producer Dominic here helping screen, I will pick a few. Scott Cornish has one. Keith, if you could choose another wrestler to write a book about or with, who might that be?
I was asked this a few months ago on a podcast, and the first time I ever met Greg, we were talking about great wrestlers that we've never met. And I had told Greg I'd never met Don Leo Jonathan. He had numerous times. But I mean, I think of wrestlers like that from that era. I think about Mick McManus never wrote a book in the UK. Current wrestlers.
Mick McManus did write a book. Hang on. There's a Mick McManus book.
Is there a Mick McManus book?
Yep. Yeah.
I thought there was the book, Jackie Mr. TV Paolo, You Grunt.
No, I'm pretty sure I got a Mick McManus one. Maybe somebody's going to correct this when we're done. But sorry, go on. Who else are you thinking of?
Okay. But, of the current wrestlers, I mean, look, it'd be fascinating to write a book with Okada, I bet Drew McIntyre has a really inspirational story. I mean, he was in, he was out. He was back. He's almost like a Chris Hero type. And then he came back during the pandemic era and won the title. So, like a kid like Sammy Guevara who nearly lost his spot. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of time in the business, but how dramatic is that to get so close? And I can remember talking to, Jungle Boy and Janela and Marco Stunt before they went down to the first AEW, and them joking like, I hope none of us does something stupid and loses this before it gets started. I see there's another question.
Yeah, Facebook user anonymous. So
Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer.
Interesting, crazy guy.
It's a good question. And the original, he was the original Doink. No, I'm sorry, that's Matt Bourne.
Matt Bourne, yes.
Matt Bourne. That would be a book to write. I never thought about doing a book on Buzz Sawyer, but yeah, sure. I mean,
why not?
If there was demand.
What about the Briscoes? Has there ever been a book about the Briscoes, or have they written anything? And if you guys,
Greg would know.
No, the Ring of Honor Briscoes have not. But
you mentioned talking about the Briscoes, or we talking about Jack and Jay?
You missed. There was the letter E there in that question.
Those Briscoes would have a great story.
Both of them, even Jerry Briscoe book. Yeah, the Jack Briscoe book was pretty good. It wasn't exactly earth-shaking, but of course he has a great story. Just growing up as a Native American and becoming a champion NCAA wrestler. Like, there was so much to that story. It was a good book. It wasn't exactly rock the boat kind of good, but it was a good book. And certainly Jack's another fascinating guy. And that's why we go to the events. We were posting the Briscoe stories the other day, and I was sitting there fondly remembering sitting with Jack Briscoe and his wife Jan in Amsterdam, New York, at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, drinking the night away. So those are good memories.
Good stories. Speaking about books, selling books, you sold one tonight, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony.
Just bought it. There you go.
That's I feel like cool. One of those webcam girls.
But yeah, it's fascinating. What's going on in the business today, and what I do here with this live show is I've been integrating a little bit more current wrestling, and there's no better and hotter topic really to talk about what's going on in the business. I'm an old schooler myself. I try to watch as much as I can the new product for today, and this is a question for you, Keith. You are another historian. You go far back. Probably used to go to the Gardens, Sunnyside Gardens, and all those shows. When was the first time you went to wrestling? And did you go in the early 70s, the late 60s?
I would say, I can remember I had an uncle who was a baker who eventually ended up moving to Miami Beach. But I remember being very young and going up to New Haven, because he was working in Connecticut at the time, and the Sheik being on the card. And I started going regularly, I'd say the early 70s, Sunnyside Gardens and Madison Square Garden, Ridgefield Grove.
Now, for me, I've been in and out. I've watched obviously I was a huge, I didn't miss a Garden show from the first time I went in 71, right through like 77 when I went to college, and I got out of the business and then came back in 89 and then left again. And now I'm back again. So I've seen a lot of the different variations of the presentation of the product. And the older I get, I don't watch every show, every match. I skim through it and I watch what I want, because the business has changed and it's a young man's game, like everything else is.
It's also not an hour of television anymore. You're asking the people to invest more.
Yeah.
It's far easier to watch when you were only investing an hour.
Yeah, and I'm watching clips. I go to YouTube. And I watched the Rusev debut on AEW, and that's what I was interested in that show. And there's just certain things that I watch, and so I don't watch NXT, and I know there's some great stuff in there. But I'm sure that I wanted to get this from your perspective as someone else in our generation, because you and I are just a couple years apart. I think Greg's the baby of the three of us.
Yeah, the baby. Okay,
the young man. How old are you, Greg? You want to give me a ballpark?
49.
Oh, 49. So you're still young dude, yes. Man. But for you to write a book about today and what's happening today and the evolution and the revolution of indie wrestling, I mean, you still have to have a passion for this business.
And it was a way to rekindle my passion too. I've said this before. I was on retainer for WWE for.
Oh, dramatic pause.
A dramatic pause.
And then, the magazine had new management, and they went in a different direction. We went out of business shortly thereafter. And, I still did some projects for the magazine and for WWE, but I was no longer part of the day-to-day landscape. Mm-hmm. And, you feel a little bit abandoned when that stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I missed the wrestling business. And every time I would get involved in a wrestling project, it would rekindle my excitement and remind me of that sense of longing. And I thought, if I do this book, this will fortify my relationship with the wrestling business. It will renew it. And I will be able to tell people I am in the wrestling business once again. And so this was for me as well as for everybody else. And I think in that regard, it was successful. I'm doing another book now. I'm now writing for that new Inside the Ropes magazine. And I do feel that I'm back in the wrestling business.
Did you suffer from any ageism? I mean that in a nice way, right? I mean, you're a little bit older.
Yeah, that's a funny question. Jake Atlas made a joke, which was certainly not an ageist joke. It was just an observation. He said, yeah, I remember you. I was talking to him at that show in Asbury Park. And he said, yeah, I remember you also interviewed me in LA a few months ago. And the reason I remember you is you write your notes very old school on a notepad, like an old time reporter. That was as ageist as it got. A lot of people told me they remembered reading my articles in the WWF magazine. Some of them had read my books. A lot of people didn't know who I was, but they, I hope they saw that I had a reverence for the business. I admitted when there were things I didn't know about. I asked people to kind of school me on things that I missed. And I felt it was very respectful.
Very good. I mean, the book is out. It's out now. We had another comment question from Bubba Husky. Available on audiobook? Yes, it is.
It is. It's available on audiobook. In fact, John told me he was listening to it on audiobook.
Yeah, I'd gotten the copy from ECW Press, and then I automatically got the audiobook and listened to that. That's how I'm absorbing it. And I'll be on a very long road trip tomorrow on my way back to Tennessee, so I will be listening in the car as well. But this book, as your whole catalog of books, I mean, if anyone is out there who's interested in the revolution that's taking place with indie wrestling right now, this is the book to get. It's out there right now.
Sweet. It's called Too Sweet Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution, just in case you want to look it up on Amazon or something.
Yep. And of course, your other books. I mean, if you haven't read the Blassie book or the Flair book or the Superstar Billy Graham book, read it. I mean, you have so many, John Lennon and everything else that you've written. It's been a pleasure really a pleasure.
I've said this to you when we briefly spoke on the phone. Like, I've known of you for years. We were Facebook friends, and it's great to actually have a conversation with you. I hope one day we have a real conversation face-to-face in person.
Oh, I'd love that. I mean, I'm coming back here to New York around Thanksgiving, and I'll be here from Thanksgiving right through the first of the year. Maybe we can grab a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever, You
guys should be going to a Mets game.
Yeah, he's got Mr. Met on his arm, I mean, that's kind of motivating me at 63 to get one myself.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
That'll be a new cover for our book, Greg.
All right, and Greg,
he knows me. Here's the thing: he knows me better than anybody now.
Greg does. Yeah.
He knows my idiosyncrasies, my procrastination tactics. I mean, he knows me like it's like looking in the mirror sometimes, and and I thank him because he's had a lot of patience holding my hand through this whole process of my first book, which comes out next year on ECW Press. So It's going to be fun. Guys, I want to thank both of you for joining me today. And Keith will be in touch. And Greg, I'm sure that we'll be in touch because we got pictures to finalize.
And Greg, I really appreciate you jumping in and helping move this along, too.
Okay, folks, for the record, Mick McManus, there's a Mick McManus book that came out in 1970. It's called the Mick McManus Wrestling Book. But you are correct, Keith. It's not really an autobiography. It's a book he helped participate in that talked about the different wrestlers. So I do have that one upstairs, but it's not an autobiography.
Yeah, I may just order it when we get off the phone, or when we get off of this.
Cool. All right, guys. Listen, you guys have a great night. Have a great weekend. Greg, I'll be speaking to you, I guess, tomorrow, from the road tomorrow, because I know we have pictures to finalize and all that. So anyway, great to see you both. Nice to meet you, Keith, face-to-face finally, and we'll talk to you both real soon. Take care, guys.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Yeah, that was good. Keith Elliot Greenberg, author of the new book that's available everywhere now. Go to a bookstore and ask for it, or go online and get the audiobook, or go to Amazon and purchase it. It's really fascinating. I'm not finished with it yet, but it's given me quite the education on how this indie revolution took place. And of course, Greg Oliver, always thanking him. I talk to Greg every single day now. Let's go to some of the comments here that are coming in. Some of them are pretty funny. But I want to thank everybody again. There's been a lot of talk about the tattoos, and someone is saying Patreon pledge for John to get a tattoo. Yeah, there you go. And Anthony, wearing your George from Lindenhurst shirt, thank you so much. $50 if it's a Yankees tattoo. That ain't happening. Even for $50,000, I don't think I'd put a Yankee tattoo on me anywhere. But some really cool things happening, and I really want to thank everybody again for joining. A couple of quick plugs. First and foremost, YouTube. We're starting a YouTube channel. It'll be John Arezzi's Matt Memories. I'm going to be uploading content. There'll be film clips. There'll be other little videos. We're going to put this show on there, and we're going to stream it live on YouTube, probably beginning next week. And speaking of next week's show, we have something really cool we're going to do, because those of you who listen, who have listened to the Pro Wrestling Spotlight Then and Now podcast, as we go back 30 years to listen to the show, or those of you who are original listeners back in the days, 1989 to 1995, when we were on the air at various radio stations. A lot of the callers had unique personalities. TJ from Deer Park in the WNYG days. Rock from Lindenhurst, whose friend Jim was always a little bit of a nemesis on the show. Vinny from West Babylon, who met his wife Andrea at a Pro Wrestling Spotlight event. So next Saturday, we're going to bring a few of them on to say hello to everybody face-to-face, have a little bit of a Pro Wrestling Spotlight reunion. And we're always working on another guest as well. I'll be heading back down to Tennessee, and we want to provide you with a great Saturday experience. So between us streaming this thing live, not only on Facebook, but on YouTube beginning next week, and the new channel, John Arezzi's Matt Memories on YouTube, we'll be sharing tidbits of a lot of different things as we gear up to the eventual launch of mattmemories.com. And that is taking much longer than we anticipated, because it's really morphing into something that we didn't anticipate, with other historians getting involved, and Bill Apter getting involved with us, and Greg Oliver and his team, and other archives that we're looking at acquiring to put up at mattmemories.com. So bear with us all. On the other front, we're going to be launching another T-shirt next week, and that's going to be from the very first wrestling fan convention of 1990. The original T-shirt is coming back, and I want to thank everybody who has ordered T-shirts from the store now. That tinyurl.com/PWS store. We are happy to have several T-shirts up there. There are lady shirts available now. but Pro Wrestling Spotlight t-shirts are available, and they're not going to be out there forever. So if you haven't gotten them, please go to the site. There's about 8 to choose from right now. And then next week, we'll be launching a new one, and that will be the weekend of the Wrestling Fans Fantasy Weekend from 1990. So if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're a Patreon member and listening to the full episodes at patreon.com/Arezzi, we're getting into the promotion of the very first convention. So if you didn't get one 30 years ago, or if you weren't born 30 years ago, it'll be your opportunity to pick one up from that very first convention. And finally, we are really looking to ramp up our auction site on Facebook. I'll have a presence on eBay upcoming as well. My username there is Matt Memories. And I'm going to Virginia tomorrow to get a lot of new stuff for the auction site. So if you haven't went there yet, we have a really cool auction going on right now that ends at 10 o'clock tomorrow night Eastern. And there are some really classic wrestling review magazines. There's a videotape of the Weekend of Champions Wrestling Convention, number 3 from 1992, along with a poster. And there's a lot of stuff up there. There's a lot of vintage wrestling magazines. So I really want to say, thank you again, as I do each and every week, because without you, there's no reason for Matt Memories or to do any of the historic stuff. And I'm very happy to be here. So I'll be heading to Tennessee tomorrow, and I'll return next Saturday with another show. And Brandon, I got Larry Z 8x10 in the mail today. Oh, you're quite welcome. A couple other comments. Well, that's a nice comment, David. Thank you very much. And Aaron, it's turning into a Saturday night tradition. Update, George from Lindenhurst. Yes, there is no update because he just doesn't have any interest, I believe, in doing anything with us. So there's nothing I can do. I'm not contacting him anymore. If he wants to do something, he's welcome to come on and do an interview or whatever. I mean, but I'm not going to invade anybody's privacy. That's for sure. And looking forward to the book. Yeah, I'll give you a quick update on that before we wrap it up today. Greg and I are working on the final photographs. So it'll be a book filled with photographs. It'll be a color insert with about 20 color pictures in it. And then throughout the book, there'll be photographs that'll be aligned with the stories that I'm telling about my days, and not only in pro wrestling, but in country music and in baseball, and growing up in Brooklyn, New York, and Long Island, and everything that my crazy life did. You guys don't know the half of it. Believe me, when this book comes out, it'll be it's going to be a very purging book for me, because there's a lot of stuff in there that no one ever knew. April the 6th, Matt Memories will be coming out, and we're about done with the cover too, so I'm very excited about that. So anyway, got a lot going on, and I'm not going to take up any more of your weekend. I really appreciate you all being with me again, and until next week, when we talk more wrestling with you, this is John Arezzi. Have a great weekend, everybody, and have a great week. See you next week.